All right. So I always start off with the same question, and I guess I'll start off there. When people tell you to be your authentic self, or when you hear the word authenticity, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think the first thing it usually starts with is like consistency. Like we, uh, like are we being like consistent like with friends? Like who we are is like with our friends is like one person. Who we are like by ourselves is one person. Who we are like with family is another thing. Who we are at work, who we are at school, and also who we are in our relationships. Like so I would say being consistent in like as many areas or as much as possible, right? Like the way I treat one person and the way I behave in one thing isn't going to necessarily always translate. But I would say like being and like feeling consistent is like for sure number one for that too.
Where do you see yourself being consistent versus yourself being like, if you have to rank it, maybe like from most consistent to least consistent, are you like mostly yourself with family, friends, and least consistent somewhere else?
I think that in the past like probably 3 years, I feel like consistent almost everywhere. And like before, it's because I've also been like someone who like has always been like, I'm gonna do my own shit always, and like I usually carry like a sense of like not giving a fuck about like like what my parent thinks or what this person thinks and these different things. But I would say like in the past like 2 3 years, I felt most consistent in almost every area, and sometimes my mom doesn't like that or doesn't want to hear everything. But I would say like yeah, like in everything, like even when I was in school growing up, like that's how I was with like teachers and also older people. Like I always was like the same way. Like yeah, I never really cared. And then I would say like the hardest transition is always like work in school, because and when I say school, I don't mean like my K through 12 experience, because a lot of that was like being in like a middle school and high school that was mostly like brown and black. But then when it came to like UC Berkeley, it's a lot more wider. Or if there's people of color, like they're white performing, so like whiteness is still very dominant, even if that they don't hit that 50% mark. And so I'd say like going to higher education and then also work were like the things that I needed to like learn the most, because that one like I would will always feel like more of a threat in some sense to like being authentic.
Yeah. Oh man, you said so much there. I mean, what happened? What happened 2, 3 years ago when you just maybe hit like a point where you couldn't do it anymore and you stopped essentially
Yeah,
like faking it?
yeah, I would say like it kind of all starts with like yourself though first, like and like that's why earlier when I mentioned consistency, like are you like being consistent, like who you are by yourself, is that also consistent with everywhere else, right? Because I could be one person when I'm alone and like to myself and to my thoughts, but if I'm still giving something else and performing something and just like in every other aspect, then I'm still not being consistent. And so I would say like I first need to like be consistent with myself and like feel like what I was doing was real. And what I was doing was like, yeah, this feels good. This is comfortable. This is like who I am. And then and that kind of started for me in college, like my sophomore year of college. And a lot of that like was around the election, right? Like a lot of times that was like a huge, but I think for like a lot of people, it like forces you to that, like that 2016 election forced you to really think about like your relationship to like your own race. And I'm sure like white people had meant like their relationship to other people.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just like a big like, whoa, like this shit's real and this shit's really powerful. And like I knew that and I experienced that, but I think there was like a lot of stuff I needed to like wrestle with and like shake off, and mostly like shame is like a big part of that. And so I would say like it all like that started like sophomore year of college. I started being more consistent with myself, and then I'm like, oh, I'm still like in this very like white dominated school, and then I'm also trying to enter tech, and I had already had some experience with tech before I even got to college, and like that was also like just I mean it's like tech in just general, like professionalism. When we say professionalism, we usually mean whiteness, and we just don't want to say that. When we say like work, I code switch at work, we mean like because it's a white institution, but we don't feel that way if it was a POC company or everyone was POC. So I would say like, yeah, and so like learning to do that uh, was like the hardest thing for like entering the workforce in tech, and also uh, learning to just like be more unapologetic while I was still in school too.
100%, man. I always say like professionalism wasn't made for us. Like, and
Yeah.
most of the time, like when you think about professionalism, like you don't think about us. So like part of what I'm trying to do is really like redefine what that looks like through, just providing like your face, you know what I mean? And then just having conversations with you and saying like, this is what professionals also look like, you know what I mean? So it's so interesting though. You mentioned the word shame, and I
Mhm.
could relate to that. Like I've been shameful of like so many things growing up, even something as simple as, not wanting to take a picture in my grandma's house of her in her apartment because I didn't think it was like Instagram worthy. You know what I mean? Like what did shame look like for you? And in particular, you mentioned the elections. Like were there certain things that were said that like stood out to you? You kind of, how did that feel?
I think there wasn't anything in particular that stood out that like I can like name, but a lot of it was like uh growing up, like I grew up like in LA and I'm also Mexican American. And my parents, like my dad came from Mexico and my mom's also, I would say, as culturally saturated as my father is, even though she was born here. And so I grew up in this area. Everyone like for the most parts, like the majority of people like do like come from like immigrant Latinx communities where I grew up in LA, like really close to Inglewood. And so I grew up in this space, right? And I have all of this, and but just like being in proximity to whiteness, and like we see these things like whether it's like in the media or like the city next door that has more money, or like the high school next door that is more well off and mostly white. And so a lot of that shame was, I would say for me in particular, it was like more on like an extreme. For some people, it's like, oh, I feel like and I think a lot of people do feel it. And so like for me, shame was like I hated my skin color like a lot.
Oh,
I used to. It was to the point where like I would avoid the sun so much that like I'd be at an event, and if uh like I was doing a summer program at this school, at this college when I was in high school, and they would always have like little banquets every week, and we'd have to be outside in the sun. And I was like, I'm not getting darker for this. So I'd sit under the table, but I was grown. I was 16 years old, still doing that shit, right? So I used to like hate my skin. I was embarrassed by it, and a lot of that like also comes from the home, right? Like everyone's telling like quemado and like doing different things like that. Like there's always comments about like my skin versus my brothers who are lighter not receiving those comments. So it's like shame around my skin, shame around like my features, shame around my name. I used to hate my name. And
man.
I also like forgot how to pronounce it correctly too for a while. So it was a lot of things. It was like damn near my whole existence. Like it was shame about like language. I'd be so embarrassed when my mom spoke Spanish in public. Uh, I would be, yeah, like it was just like, yeah, culturally too. I remember one time telling my parents, I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna tell people I'm from Spain. My mom was like, there's no brown people in Spain. And then I was like, let me look it up. I find some Gitanos that are brown. And so it was just like holistically, it was the whole thing. And then uh, at the same time, like my father was also deported when I was in middle school. And I used to be really ashamed by that. And I also used to believe like so much of like the anti-immigrant rhetoric and like blame him for that happening, even though it was not his fault at all. And so it's just like, like the election comes full circle. Like I spent like, I'm like learning about a bunch of stuff, and like had already been in the process of like undoing some of these things, but then just like the election night just like made like expedited that entire process and meant that like I had to like in many ways like grieve and like feel the pain of everything, right? Because that stuff also does damage. It's not just like, oh, I felt ashamed or I felt embarrassed. It's like that, like internalizing that is very damaging. And so yeah, I would say that's that's how I would define, like it was holistic, it was everything. And so
Yeah.
just like it being like pulled front and center, right? It's like this like national conversation, it's like this big old thing, really like made me hit like a breaking point, like to the point where I literally took a month off of school uh, and wasn't sure if I was going to return that semester.
It's crazy too because sometimes out of love in a weird way, I think culturally, like I saw a meme the other day, it was like Latinos will turn Latinos will give you a nickname that's your biggest insecurity. Like, right? It's like, hey, gordita, right? Or like, hey,
Uh,
moreno, or like all of these things. And, sometimes it comes out of love, but they don't understand like the impact that it has on someone.
like every like country in Latin America is very different, and countries like Mexico are far more white centered, right? There's a lot more uh, white Latinos, even if they did immigrate, right? They might share like the hardships of like having immigrated here, but they, in
Yeah.
many ways, are either white presenting or white performing or both. And
Yeah.
especially when you come here and it's just like, we want like our, uh, like those things are like learned there too. And like, I'm sure like they call like Mexicans call their kids quemado when they're in Mexico, unless they're coming from like a more indigenous family. But when you're coming from like a family that's probably more mestizo and or more like Spanish leaning, then like that rhetoric of like being like uh, of like just like colorism is gonna show up.
Yeah. No, I mean that the colorism is definitely present in even the Dominican culture as well. And yeah, I mean, I grew up Dominican. I didn't grow up Mexican, so I'm not familiar with like everything. So some of these questions is really just me like being curious. And even in LA where you grew up, again, I mean, I grew up in New York. Like, tell me about like what that was like. What did the neighborhood look like for you? Like, was it mostly Mexican? You said that down the street potentially it was a lot of white people. Like, just what did that dynamic look like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Hawthorne, so it like borders a couple cities, right? So one of the cities that is most known that it borders is Inglewood, which is going to be more like Black and brown centered. And then another one that it borders is going to be like Manhattan Beach is right next door. And if you know anything about Manhattan Beach, it's like super fucking white and also super well.
Yeah.
And so it's just like
A lot of my clients live there, and these are just like CEOs of certain companies type of
yeah,
shit.
they have hella money, and it's they're also hella racist. Every single time I go out there, at least now, like I'm not taking that shit and check. But like, so there's that's like that proximity. So like my parents like met and had started together like in Inglewood. My mom lived there, and my dad had spent a lot of time there as well. And so it's like that's like the in between. And then Hawthorne itself is more of a gradient of a city. There are there there was a time when the city was more white and like Italian leaning, but then from like white flight, like then we ended up it becoming a city that had a lot more like Latinos and Black people. But if you go like east of Hawthorne, there's gonna be more Black communities. If you go west towards the beach cities, it's gonna turn more white and like the houses get more expensive. If you're more like central going towards Inglewood, it'll be a mix of like Black or brown. And then when it comes to like Latinos that are around, I think that Latinidad looks very different in every part of the United States. And so we'll find that like in LA, there tends to be a lot more El Salvadorians, people from Honduras, and also like Mexicans and just like Central America. And then like in the East Coast, you're right, we have like Cubans and we have like, there's like a lot more like Dominican people, Puerto Rican people. That was the first time I was ever exposed to like a whole community of that when I went to the coast. And so I would say LA was like mostly Mexican. And there was also Salvadorian and Hondurans.
And then being around sort of a lot of people that look like you, right, for most of the time growing up, um, what did that level of Latinidad look like for you? You mentioned that in some ways it wasn't comfortable because of your skin color. You felt ashamed of your name. And even like there was that language barrier, right? As far as like your family communicating in Spanish, like what did that overall feel like being around all this Latinidad?
Yeah, and so I was just mostly like the outlier, right? Like I didn't learn shame in my own community. I mean, outside of like my skin, but that was like me being like I grew up like very much like in like the culture, and I would say like Chicano culture. It's very different than like Mexican culture. Like Latinos in LA have really created this like, and it very separate than like the political identity of being Chicano, but just like LA Chicanos have created very much like their own. Uh, I would say like culture and like nuances to things that obviously are like heavily enriched by like the countries that people come from. But so I grew up in all of that, like, and also like my parents used to be gang affiliated. So I also had like the lowriders around. Like I have a '65 Mustang now. Always had like, so there's just like a lot of like cultural aspects of like what you would expect a Latino from LA to experience. Like that's what I grew up in. But the difference was like I was also like very smart in the sense that like I learned fast. And so then there's like this idea of like, of oh, I'm very different than these people, and it's like if I wanted, I understood being like getting myself out as also distancing myself completely from like the culture and like from these different things. And so it's like as I'm trying to distance myself from these things, I'm also like peeking over, seeing what's nearby, right? I'm like participating in like organizations, and I'm seeing there's like all these different people, and I'm like trying to be part of that, because I know I'm gonna leave one day. It's like, and so a lot of that was like my own doing for sure. And the like even in my college essay, I wrote about like how I was like trying to be the opposite of what I had grown up in every single way, and then identifying academics as one of that without realizing that that like that just like was like not the case, or also like not necessary at all.
Yeah, I feel like that a lot of times too, man. Because I mean, where I live right now, I live in it's a town called Riverdale in the Bronx, but it's pretty much the suburbs. And I feel like, oh, I'm able to live here because I have a certain amount of money, but at the same time, like I'm not around people that look like me. So it's kind of like the more successful you get, or like certain type of schooling, et cetera, like the further people that move out. And I feel like sometimes like, damn, I'm kind of like missing out on like being around my people and the culture that I grew up around.
Yeah, I feel in Seattle because it's white as fuck here. Yeah, for sure, and that definitely does happen. Uh, yeah, but eventually, like we can always find our way back. Like I do think I'm gonna go back to LA at some point.
Yeah. And tell me about, right? Because like your like first move out of the hood, let's call it, or like out of where you grew up is going to college, right? At Berkeley. And that's a good ass school, man. Like what was
Yeah.
that like going, first of all, just like changing your community aesthetically, but also just like it's an amazing school. Like, did you have imposter syndrome growing up? Like, what were some going in there? Like, what were some of those feelings like just starting in?
I think like everyone wants to talk about imposter syndrome. That is like also uh, like, and I think that a lot of times like the thing that is missed there is like the extra level that like comes by being racialized. And so if you are someone who is racialized, and like that also like is a gradient, right? Like, so people who may be racialized the most will be Black people. People who are like white Mexicans will be far less. People who are more brown like me will be more in the middle, right? And so it's like if you are racialized and you're also feeling like, oh, like I don't belong here. How did I get here? Right? Like I'm struggling so much more than these people. Uh, I'm like not able to perform. I like didn't have like the same education that they had when they came into this place. So I like definitely felt out of place. And then I would say like the most out of place I ever felt was like was definitely like my freshman year dorm. Like, right, I have to show up to this place every single day. I'm sleeping there, and I'm just like very different than everybody. But and yeah, and also there's like the mix of like, oh, I would love to be part of this, but also just like it not feeling like it's a clique either. Um, and so I would say like that was, I think, yeah, like that image comes to mind. It's just like, oh, this is also like when I go to classes, it's like weird and whack. No one wants to work with me. No, even if like the GSI is assigning them to. And then I'm also going to like, and then it's like I'm going to like my dorm, and I like look at so many people on my floor, and I felt like there's only one person I could like more culturally identify with. And so that was definitely like a shock. And I at the time wasn't like leaning into like different communities. Like I wasn't going to like the multicultural center, and that changed. Like when I started going there, that was like a game changer. When I wasn't like participating in different things that were probably going to be best for me feeling like a fit there.
What do you mean? Like, what did you participate in?
I think like a couple of things. Like I would study at the multicultural center, and so like everyone there was like for the most part like not just POC, because we'll find like at places like UC Berkeley, like if someone is like non-white and they got in, a lot of times they are also performing whiteness as much as possible, right? And a lot of people can do it, and that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing racism, but they are still like choosing to like opt into and perform whiteness. And so like in the multicultural center, it's just like other people are like POC, but they're also like uh, they don't give a fuck about performing whiteness. And there's also like advocacy groups that are showing up there, and like people like doing like real like racial work. And so that space in itself was very, very nice to just like be in and like study, because I didn't like studying at the libraries at all with like all those other people. Like sometimes I try like getting a seat at this big ass table, and the people were like, "Oh no, you can't sit there." And then and then I'm like walking around trying to find a seat in this library, and I see like other people just like other like white or Asian people just taking their seat right there, and I'm just like, oh, I hate this. And so like the multicultural center was dope, and then I'd done like HES for a little bit, not too much. It's like the Hispanic Engineering Society. So that was cool. But and then oh yeah, the biggest thing for sure is I moved into a cooperative living space that was for POC, and we also like were rooted in like like anti-racist work, and so it was very nice to be in a house with like 50 people, and the people that I meet there, like people are all like very different, like uh, doing like very different specific things, like right, like some people are in environmentalism, some people are doing like prison abolition work, some people are doing like legal work, some people are doing medical, trying to get into medical school, right? And so like it was just a huge like diversity of people with in terms of also like what they were interested in, and I also got to see them and like celebrate them being like successful in what they wanted. So that was like also a really dope space to be in, because I'm like feel really comfortable at home, but also I get to like witness people just like who I'm more identify with and are like really doing their shit, and that was really nice too.
Yo, that's what I try to tell people, man. Like, it's not only about like being around people that look like you, but it's about being around people that look like you that are doing dope shit. Because if it's just people that look like you and they're not doing anything, like where's the inspiration in that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I mean, there's that saying, right? Like you can only be what you can see, right? So if you're a freshman coming in and you have a senior that is being themselves and also like accomplishing a bunch of dope shit, advocating for shit that really like speaks to you, then you're like, oh shit, like I could do that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's so funny that you mentioned the word, like you continue to mention the word performative. And I
yeah.
try to tell people that like it's not something as simple as like people think like, oh, you're being your authentic self if you curse more often and like do these things, or
Yeah,
like
that's not it.
it's not that, man. But it's crazy. Like I told people like I used to perform. I legit used to like rehearse in front of the mirror, study, and then like go into work and like actually perform to the point where like I knew the latest fucking God, what's that? I knew the latest Bruce Springsteen tracks. I knew the
Yeah.
latest like shows so I could like jump into conversations. Did you do any of that? Like how much of the like performative stuff like did you lead into?
Uh, I would say like yeah, so I would say like if I were to like define like my experience, I would say it was less. I would say like before, like especially like speaking to like the things I was doing like in high school, like right, like because I had internalized so much of this like shame. I was never code switching. Like I wanted to be white in my home, in my friendships, at school, at work, everywhere, even by myself. And so like there was no code switching there. So I didn't feel like I was performing or I needed to like do something that was like out of my regular schedule. And so like my process was a lot less of like of performing less, but actually like rethinking and like undoing like the perception I had like made for myself. And so I was never like trying to like learn or like get into things for like the sake of performing whiteness. I just wanted to be white. So it was like all around.
Wait, tell me about that. So instead of like you didn't see it as a performance, you just saw it as like this is who I am, right? Like I want to be white all around. Like what about
Yeah.
that process? So like what did you do?
I mean, it's like a weird and awkward thing right now to say, right? Like I'm like so different today, but like
No, I get
that's
it. I get it.
what it was. And yeah, I'm not sure. Like I would say like I wasn't code switching. Like I just like had wanted to be a certain way, and also like I guess like reach a point where like I didn't feel like I was like asking for permission to be in white spaces, but like I was like, oh, I'm just like everyone else here. And yeah, I mean, what was that like? I'm not too sure. Like I was just like, yeah, I'm not too sure how to answer that. Like I was just
It's
like
okay.
going about thinking that this was like who I was. And so um
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so you're in college, you're having these experiences, and then you go into like these multicultural centers and you meet a lot of people that look like you. Like
yeah.
was there a shift in just like how you perceive yourself, how you thought about yourself um in that experience? Like did some of that shame like
I mean I had already been doing a lot of that work already before I entered those spaces. And so like before I got into like POC house and before I even going to like the multicultural center and these different things, like I had already done a lot of that work on my own. And then I like stepped into those things like my junior year, and I was like, oh, this is like nice and affirming. but it wasn't necessarily something that was like catalyzing the actual growth or change that needed to happen. Yeah, so like sophomore year of college is when I was 2016 election, and then I like that was my first semester. That was my fall semester there, and then I just like take hella time off, and and yeah, and then I like was still like learning. I still had like friends who were Latino in school. You know, I still had my friends I grew up with who are also like Black and brown, and so I yeah, I was just like already like undoing a lot of that before I got there. And so getting there was just more affirmative than anything else.
Got it. And a big part of college is really like preparing you in many ways for like your first full-time job, or like that, corporate America, let's call it. And did you do any internships in college, or
Yeah, I
yeah?
got a lot. And I'm glad that I had already started doing like the unlearning before I entered those internships, because I would have started off very differently. And then that probably would have meant that I would have probably kept up certain behaviors. And so my first like real internship was after I had a couple jobs before, but like first internship entering tech was at Qualcomm. And so I had already been like doing this like work before I got there. And so then when I got there, I was just like, I was just like already feeling more comfortable with myself, and like not necessarily like feeling like I was performing whiteness in any way. And the challenge was like uh, was more so of like getting in the practice of like holding my own, but also just like checking people who were doing foul shit. And so yeah, like I had my first internship. It was cool. I was like, I was definitely like, I'm not like the rest. And at Qualcomm, it's in San Diego, so everyone wears like their little flip flops or cargo shorts. The median age is also a lot older. It's a lot more white, a lot more, yeah. And so just like being in that space was very different. And I just was like walking around, I was just like, yeah, I'm definitely not a fit here, but I was like, I'm still gonna do it anyways. And so that was like my first internship. And uh, I didn't really like the interns. They were, uh, I mean, in all ways, like uh, they were there. There's like a handful of them who were pretty problematic, especially in group chats. And so like one day, I was just like, I was like, there is like this person who also was an intern under HR and decides to keep using the N word and calling areas ghetto. And I was just like, oh, I'm not here for that. And so I just like and I also didn't befriend any interns because like I'm not like it was just like not a fit. Like I had tried attending different things here and there, but it was just like wasn't clicking. I was like, I'm not gonna force it. I have other friends in San Diego, and so being there, and then I like finally like I was just like, I don't really fuck with these people. I don't really identify with them. I tried doing like like the little stuff that were events, but it just wasn't clicking. And then I went to and then I eventually just like had to check somebody and like let them know like that shit wasn't cool, and like that needed to be the last time they said anything in that chat. And so
What
like
was what
yeah.
was said in that specific experience? And by the way, I can bleep out the name of companies and all that, so that whatever.
Oh, I don't care. Yeah, that's totally cool. That's totally cool. I was gonna release some like written pieces about stuff so they can know it's fine. I'm not going back to Qualcomm. um, so yeah, definitely like what was said. I like eventually was like I was coming from it of like, oh, like this feels really difficult to like check, and I was just I like took it. I was trying to figure out the best way to do it. So I had also, I think it's like pretty common knowledge that it's not okay to be saying it if you're not Black. And so I was just like encourage them to like look it up if they really didn't understand. And then also like told them that like that they were like offending different people within that who were part of like the that intern cycle, and that like whether they agree or not as to whether they should be able to use it or not, like that is besides the point, because now they are like knowingly making people uncomfortable and knowingly being disrespectful, and like that in itself is a separate conversation than whether or not you think you should be able to use it. I'm like, because now it's about you knowing that you're disrespecting people, and now it's about you knowing that you shouldn't, and that's like a whole different conversation. And so I was that's like how I had approached it.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, yeah, I mean, I did it respectfully, as respectful as you can be. And I just like left it at that. And I eventually like left the chat. No.
That's for your first. I mean, like you've obviously had some of these experiences before, but I think it's just different being as it's work, right? And work has such a, although it's just an internship, a lot of people's internship experiences like, oh, ultimately I want to get a full-time job here. Or it's like even before you start, right? Or it's like, I need these people to give me a recommendation so that I can ultimately get a full-time job. And I think it's so different because this has such an implication on your bank account, you know what I mean? Like how much money you're gonna make. So was it
Yeah.
scary around like even having that conversation, especially in a sense that that wasn't directed towards you? It was more so like, if anything, you're standing up for so many other people, right?
Yeah. I didn't even consider that. And I think that that's not been a factor in when I decide to say anything like, uh, yeah, that like never came to mind at all. Yeah, I think I was just, and I think that a lot of that, like, I think that like I can like understand that fear, but uh, it was like definitely not something that has had like motivated me then. Also, like not something that had motivated me moving forward in like any decision that I've made to like correct behavior or say something. Yeah.
I love that, man. I mean, you, to be able to get to that point, like you, again, you've done a ton of work, right? And
Yeah.
I think that that month off in particular was probably like life changing, right? Like
Oh, most
what
definitely.
what was that like? And I think I need to take a month off and just go through like that
Yeah,
thought process that you went through,
it
man.
wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. I mean that time was a hard time. So like, one I have to like deal with so many feelings I never dealt with, and so like that was like very 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 heavy. And then I couldn't like really do school. Like I couldn't focus. I couldn't sleep. I was having a lot of like depressive and anxious symptoms, and I see I was seeing a therapist. I was also at the same time, uh, that night, there was a project due, also an election night, for one of my
Wow.
CS classes, and it's super competitive at UC Berkeley. That if you get less than a B plus on any class, any of the 3 classes you need, then you won't get into the major. And so if I was failing this project, and because of that, I was not going to get into the major. So it was like election night, and also me realizing like, wow, I'm trying so hard, but I'm not going to get in, and I'm not going to make it in tech. That was so it was just like like feeling like everything was shit basically. And so I just couldn't do school, and I mean I just spent a lot of time alone and not happy, but also just like uh, thinking more critically, and also just like reflecting, and just like giving myself like the space to catch up on things that I had ignored for so long. And then I did go back the last week of school, mostly just to take finals, and I did it. I just was like, I'll finish the semester, and things kind of ended up working out. I still got into tech, even though I didn't get into the major, which was wonderful. Um,
And what were some of those like realizations coming out of it? If maybe there was like one or if you had like a top three, yeah.
uh, the Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that came out of it, and I would say it's like less of a realization, was just more of like, uh, was just like learning to be a little bit more unapologetic. I mean, a lot more unapologetic. I think that like you don't really feel shame when you're unapologetic. You don't, and that's part like if you're feeling shame, then you're not really being unapologetic. Like you're doing these things, but you're still feeling a little bit of shame. And so I think like that was what I came out with like the most. Uh, yeah, but I would definitely say like learning to be unapologetic was like the biggest thing that I felt like I needed.
I love that, man. So I mean, yeah, I try to have that mindset like every day, but it's definitely not easy, man. And then all right, so you have your first experience, and definitely this time off and this reflective period definitely helps you in that
Yeah,
first experience, but it's not your last experience. Not your last internship or job.
yeah, yeah.
Were there any other experiences any other experiences in tech that really just like were just like
Yeah,
confronted a lot of these same ideas?
Yeah, so I think that it like shows up on different levels, right? So it could show up on a more micro level of like the way I interact with my coworker, or like some sly shit that a coworker said, right? That's like one way it could show up, but it also shows up on like institutional levels. And so like I had been like learning a lot more about that, and so I like wrapped up Qualcomm. Then I have my junior year, and then I had gotten Facebook, and that's where we had met. And so then I felt like one of the things I like really didn't like a lot of the stuff at Qualcomm in particular. I just didn't think it was like a place that was going to be fitting for a lot of people who uh, who were just like young and who didn't want to cave into whiteness. And so going into Facebook, I had like the mindset of like, oh, like I want to get involved in like some sort of effort or something. And that was just like the intention, and I didn't know what was going to end up happening there at all. And then I show up there, right? Team's really cool. All this talk about like bringing your full self to work, and which is like sounds really cute. And I think the good thing about that is like it's a reference point, right? So then if and it allows me, and it gives me just like something under my belt. So it's just like, well, I'm bringing myself to work, and that's something that we're kind of agreeing on, right? And so whether or not like it's lived out, at least it like gives us like a reference point. But like we agreed on that one, so I think that like that's definitely something that helps. And so I wasn't like necessarily experiencing stuff at like within like my team or like in my own interactions, but I mean it's just like a super large company, and also like had been like publishing diversity reports and seeing little to no growth every single year, and taking no responsibility for it, and just like serving a lot of like scripted responses all the time, and like uh yeah, and it's just, and so I like week 2 I like start my internship, and I was just like, oh, I want to be part of like this changing, right? Because they talk so much about diversity, all this stuff, right? And so I was just like, well, I want to see what I can be a part of. And the whole time I'm still a software engineering intern. And by week 2 I just like went to my first event, and it was I'm forgetting their name, but it was a chief diversity officer hosting like a Q&A. And so then I'm like listening to the stuff, and then uh, I had asked, I had asked some questions. So I did some research, and if you ever try to like talk about like diversity in tech and trying to get like articles or like different things, like I think maybe in 2020 there's a little bit more, but in 2018 it was, I would be looking up online. I was just like, there's not much, and uh, I was asking about. I had 2 questions. One is that like if we remain heavily dependent on referrals, then we're never going to see a change in our numbers. And the second point was uh, about like if we keep targeting schools like UC Berkeley and MIT and all of these really great technological schools that like Black and brown people don't have the opportunity to enter, then what? And so those were like my questions. And so I was like a little nervous, like second week as an intern, but I was just like, I'm gonna go ask and stuff. And she had some good responses, and that was great. Uh, then after that, I was just like, all right, I'm gonna keep doing this. And I just tried reaching out to people um, on like different fronts, and then also like showing up to Q&As and like trying to ask more hard questions.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And yeah, I mean, I still work at Facebook, and I've always found that value really funny. Like, be your authentic self, but no one actually talks about what that looks like. And I feel, maybe this is just my opinion, but I feel like there's like a level of authenticity where they like don't want you to be, you know what I mean? And I think I think a lot of times like people of color get dinged for being their authentic self because they do that, and then they're labeled as certain things, you know what I mean? Like difficult to work with, aggressive, or like all of these things. So it's such a vague thing, and like you said, like it's cute to say when you implement it, and you like have, when you have people of color being their authentic selves, like there's like a conflict in like if it's professional or not.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think that like when I hear be your authentic self, I like am reminded of how uh I mean, Facebook in particular was talking about how, like, I forgot who had said it when I was at a Q&A, but about like, well, you can have two white men who have blue colored eyes and there's still a lot of diversity there because they can have different interests. So when they're talking about be your authentic self, a lot of times that was for like a diversity and whiteness. And I was like, that's cute for them, but that's not like, doesn't necessarily like show up or like address uh, like racial perceptions when people of color are themselves.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've been more comfortable being yourself, like the more experience that you get, maybe the more experience you get, the bolder you get as well. Like,
I mean, it's a learned thing, right? And so it's just like, and so I think that like part of it's just like, one, you have to be willing to like normalize your experiences in these places, uh, and then like you start feeling more confident about that. So like sometimes at first I was like, oh, like I didn't want to bring my lunch to work because like I was making tinga de pollo and I have tostadas in my tapatio bottle. I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm definitely gonna be eating what I want to eat. And so, because I'm not gonna eat this food that I like. Oh, it's cooked well, but it's not like something that makes me feel at home. So, like sometimes it's like little things, right? And so like, uh, there has to be like the desire, and then you just get in the practice of doing it and trusting that like no matter what, like you're still good. And I think that's a big part of it. And so it's like, it definitely is like learned, but it's not going to be learned if you're not trying, and it's not going to be learned if you're not pushing yourself, and it's not going to be learned. Like we want everyone else to create a space for us, but we don't even try doing the little things sometimes. And so I think that's like always like a really important step. It's like we want our experiences to be normalized, but we have to normalize them for ourselves first.
yeah, facts. What were there any other scenarios where you found yourself in certain scenarios where you're just like, ooh, I shouldn't bring that part of myself into work? You mentioned food, for example. Was there anything else?
Uh, Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that one of the things that I remembered when I was like at Facebook talking to coworkers, people were talking about like family and stuff, and I remember like just like speaking about mine and like also like referencing different things, and like I remember like somebody having a reaction to something I said. I don't remember now what it was I said, and then when I was walking to the elevator, I was just like, that was weird, but I was happy that like I still like stuck to what I said and still said it and still was like, yeah, I don't care. And I'm gonna keep doing that. And so, yeah, I think there's moments where that's gonna happen and happen. Like it happened for me, like at Microsoft, it happens in school. It's gonna happen in every setting. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned consistency early on in the conversation as well. Like, I mean, given everything you've gone through at this point, like from a 1 to 10, how comfortable are you being your authentic self in like the work setting?
I I think as long as minimum requirements are met, meaning that like you're not being like you feel like there's like a level of safety or you're not being bullied, right? So then I feel like I am authentically myself, like for sure. And like always, there's times where that wasn't the case, but I was also being bullied by a manager, and so I like just like had shut off and was like, I'm not participating in any of this. Uh, and so like that was like, you know, like that requirement wasn't met. And there's also like ton of people who like are queer or like not cis or not straight, and like there's a level of like violence that they experience on different levels. And so it's just like if like the minimum of like safety and like not being bullied or harassed is like not met, then I don't expect people to like keep pushing themselves if like they're not safe.
That's it. And it's so interesting that you chose the word safety, because most people think about just being plain uncomfortable, right? But safety is like another severity. I mean, it wasn't until this year that the Supreme Court passed that it's illegal to discriminate for work based on like sexual orientation, like
Yeah,
until this year. And
yeah,
people think about these large corporations that have somewhat protections in place, but a lot of companies like don't. A lot of these smaller companies, like, you will get retaliated against depending on like how you self-identify.
yeah. And there's like limits to that too, right? Like a lot of like uh a lot of like those things need to be like named, right? So like we might experience so many microaggressions, and well, the person never explicitly mentioned my race, So because of that, it's not considered racial discrimination. And because of that, it's not protected. It's not considered one of those protections. And so, and that's the same thing for like queer people. If you are like a cis male, but also queer, and you are maybe perceived as emotional, and then your manager starts taunting you for that. But because they never specifically mentioned that like your sexuality, then it doesn't count as discrimination, right? But like we can still be like, as like protections only go so far legally if like if our race or orientation or gender is not being named, then it's totally cool for the most part.
Wow, yeah, I never thought about that. Did you go through some of those scenarios where like it was clearly one thing in your
Yeah.
head, but because it wasn't mentioned, you couldn't necessarily
Yeah,
proceed with
there's
certain?
one
Yeah.
thing for sure. So like I'm also queer, and that's like an identity I've been like sitting with a lot more in the past 2-3 years. And I remember that, so I was asked a personal question by my manager, my old manager, and he had asked me something about my family, and I just told him, oh, there's just a lot going on. And my voice had cracked when I had said that because there was a lot going on. And I didn't say much. All I said was, there's a lot going on. And my voice cracked, and that was it. And then he went on for like 2 months calling me emotional and making it a joke, and like telling people to put it up on, like, we went bowling, he told them to put my name up as emotional. It just was like nonstop. And then I had to like really like check him and make sure it was like he completely stopped. And right, so like the because I'm like deviating from like what a man should be in terms of like the way in which we communicate emotions, then I'm starting to get like bullied for this and stuff. And so at Microsoft, like we had this like case opened up against my old manager, and it was just a really robust case because that was only like one small thing compared to like 20-30 different things that he just was doing. And so when they were investigating that particular portion, they were investigating whether it could be counted as discrimination or not, like legally. And the lawyers ruled that it would not be counted. And I wasn't trying to push for it. I was just like letting them know that it's like I was being bullied because I'm deviating from like this particular behavior that is expected of me. And so yeah, and so it became like, yeah, that was like part of like the case. And then it's like legally, well, it's like, well, if it was not named, then it doesn't matter.
Wow. Yeah, man, it's wild how much of someone's experience could really be dictated by one person. You know what I mean? Like you could work for this huge organization, but you
Yeah,
have your manager who's really there to like make you be successful, and so much of your experience is determined by that one person. You know what I mean? Because he has so much control. He or she has so much
yeah.
control over your growth. All right, and then there's that power dynamic as well. Like, did the power dynamic have like come into play at all as far as like your ability to, because part of your authenticity is not only how you show up just like visually, but also like you're outspoken, you're fearless, right? Like did that sort of hide it in a way because of that power dynamic?
There was that it did in the beginning. It was like very early on. Like I never had a good relationship with him. It was, I mean, by like the third week, he was asking me why I was a software engineer and telling me that I didn't know anything. And so I was just being disrespected from the beginning. And he was like creating dynamics that were making it a lot harder to like learn and just like work in just general. And so in the beginning, it was like definitely really difficult because I was like, I had been so insecure about like my like whether or not I belonged in the space for so long, because I just like, I didn't get into the major. I was like, and then I also didn't get a return offer from my previous internship, and so like my confidence was already low, and so because of that, and like and I felt like I was told you don't belong here in so many different ways, and it was the first time that I was being told that like just explicitly and verbally, and so yeah, it definitely like played a big role in the beginning, but after like 2 months and then opening up like a case, I was just like, nah, that's not true. And then I just was like, started to speak up more, like a lot more. And it just like kept leading to like constant disagreements uh, where he can like lose his cool and be more disrespectful and be like calling people out of character and raising his voice. And I'm like there calm, collected, being like professional, you know, it's like this whole thing. Cause like in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I have this case and he doesn't know about it. And so like, I was going about it, but I was just like, well, you're wrong. And on these things. And like, sometimes he'd be like, try to yell at us for like not knowing how to do something. I was just like, well, we've been here for like 7 months. If it was that important, you should have brought it up earlier. We didn't even know this thing existed. And he was just like, always just like, yeah, it was just always irrational. And so I like just once I like started speaking up, then after that I just kept maintaining it and maintaining like what is like fair and what's not fair and like verbalizing that for sure.
Bro, man, it's wild because so many of these things happen, and you know, I've been saying for so long, like these conversations a lot of time they go untold. You know what I mean? Like they sometimes get on Glassdoor, but they're told anonymously. So like people think they're made up, or
I mean,
go
I'm
for it.
encouraged by people to not share to share the thing more out, because then it's like, oh well, like then it's like other people in the company might see you this way. It might be harder for like transfers. That doesn't look good on you. And like I remember I was thinking about making like a little post on Medium or something, and people were like, "Tell me not to, tell me not to." And these are people who are also POC and also like, you know, like know quite a few things and like deviate from whiteness, but there's still like this like huge like fear of like saying something and sticking up for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I remember just working. I mean, I've been on Facebook for 3+ years. There've been at least maybe 4 articles that were posted on Medium from Facebook employees, and some of them were anonymous. And I remember when they were posted anonymous, like I've heard coworkers tell me they were like, these articles are made up. No way this really happened.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
part of like what I want to do is really like put a face to the name, but also put a face to some of these stories, man. So I just want to say, like, honestly, like, not even because this is being recorded, but like I really appreciate just like your vulnerability, your transparency, and your just like fearlessness and just sharing some of these stories, man. Because to your point, it'll probably open up someone else's experience and open up their ability to just share some of this.
yeah, most definitely. And I also see that like it even happened when like other coworkers are being disrespected and they don't want to like
Yeah.
stand up or say something. They're like, well, I can't. And I'm just like, well, that's like not fair to you. And yeah, and I remember even early on, like one of my coworkers told me like, oh, if you're having an issue with any with like the manager or another coworker, like come talk to me first. Don't like say something or do something that might get you in trouble. Like that might not look good on you. Just like come talk to me. And I think a lot of that was because like there's like this fear of saying something, or that we're also taught that like, well, we made it here and we have to pay our dues. And that's just not true, especially when you're younger in this thing. Like it's my first full-time job as a software engineer. And like, I was constantly being told, well, we know how things work around here. You're still new. Like this is just like huge idea of like, well, you need to pay your dues. And like, all of that's BS. No, I don't. No, I don't need to be disrespected. No, I don't need to pay my dues. Like I'm here. And that's that.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's so funny because I tell my mom some of these stories about like my own experiences. And I'm like, Mom, you know what? Next time they say something, I'm going to say something. They're like, Mijo, no, no, no. Like, be happy that you're there. Like, don't this and that. I'm just like, oh, Mom. Oh,
And that's also behavior that we're taught. And we do that for everything.
yeah.
And it's like, we're taught that in so many different ways of like, if like, one, and I think it comes from two different things. One is that like we still like a lot of that reason is because we still feel like we're asking for permission to be in these spaces, and because white people don't feel that way, and white people don't take that, and maybe they do, maybe, but a lot of them won't, and a lot of that's because they don't feel like they're asking for permission to be there, and so it's just like when we still feel like, oh, I'm like barely getting permission to be here. Why am I going to speak up? You know, and the other thing too is just like we're constantly given like breadcrumbs and taught that like, well, if you're not taking it, you're not being grateful, then that's just gonna be the end of the road. We're not working with you anymore. And I remember when I was talking to other people, I don't know if you were part of this conversation or not, but I was like, I was talking to different people at Facebook who were full-time employees about like ideas and like approaches and like suggestions that would probably like really make more significant change. And a lot of it was like, oh, that's too much to ask for. No, no, like that's too much. That's too much. And like the feeling like we just have to take what we're given and say thank you, because if not, then like that's just the end of it.
Nah, man, I definitely wasn't part of those conversations. I think you and I connected more so on just because I was on I'm still on the sales side, and it was more so just like career, like who can I connect you to and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, man, because we're giving breadcrumbs and we should be grateful. Meanwhile, like I don't think my mom knows that like, yo, other people are getting full loaves of bread out here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Most the whole thing is just like real interesting, and like yeah, but all in all, it's like it's worth like pushing, and it's worth like being clear of like what is fair and what is ours.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. And we're almost at time, man. And there's so many things that we need to get into that I just want to
Yeah.
like ask you more questions on. But I'll end it here and just ask you this final question, man. Given all that you've been through, given the growth that you've had across like all these, throughout these years, what's one thing that continues to inspire, empower, encourage you to continue being your most authentic self?
Uh, the thing that comes to mind immediately is young people. I don't like I I feel like uh I don't know if there's ever been a time where entire generations are paying attention to youth today. And like I'm like at the cutoff of like being at the end of being a millennial. Like I'm on the last year of it basically, right? But in so many ways, I'm able to like look at how confident and unapologetic and unwilling to compromise youth are today on like certain issues. And I think that like uh, there's just a lot like I think everyone should be paying attention to them and like seeing the way they're doing things because like they're not just it's like I think millennials brought like diversity into tech and all these different spaces, but a lot of that was at the expense of being white performing. And I think that like this new wave of people who are like younger than me uh, are definitely like being trailblazers in the sense of like being unapologetic and being uncompromising. And so I would, if I were to like say draw inspiration from some group, I want to give it all to them.